Welcome back to another PT Pro from the Optimal Body Podcast. I'm Dr. Dom.
I'm Doc Jen.
And today we're going to be talking about the difference between abs versus core exercises. And you might not be able to tell, well, what is the difference? Aren't they the same? Not quite, at least how we understand it. Here we go.
All right, we're going to talk into the difference between ab exercises and core exercises, which could be, combined. However, there is a direct difference. And I think it's important to note because when someone is saying, oh, I have back pain, I've been told to do core exercises, a lot of times people just think ab exercises.
Totally.
Right?
And I think the main thing we need to start off with is defining kind of what we understand is the abs or the abdominals versus what we would define as the core. And so if we're thinking abs, I think first, right off the bat, most people are going to think six-pack. When you say abs, that's almost synonymous in people's mind with six-pack, which is that rectus abdominis. That's the muscle that we call commonly the six-pack. And then there's a few other main layers of our abdominals, which are the obliques. We have the internal and external obliques, and then the TVA or the transverse abdominis, which is like a big corset that hugs all the way from our ribs, all the way around to our back and attaches down to our pelvis too.
Yeah, and that'd be like the deepest layer that people are really considering, to be that stabilizing core muscle that's so important for back pain. How can we learn ways to activate these things so that we do start using them in movement and they become functional rather than just let me stiffen my whole body for the fact of stiffening my whole body? That's not functional.
We don't generally walk around like that. Our shoulders, our shoulder blade, our shoulder girdle is included in the core.
Yeah.
At least how we understand it. Same with our hips and that pelvis. You mentioned the pelvic floor, diaphragm, rib cage, all of that operates within this central pillar that we would call the core, right? And so rather than just learning how to tighten up a few of those muscles really well, how do we, learn how to activate them, but then use that within all these dynamic movements that we do throughout the day, like opening a door, like reaching to grab something, like picking up a child, things that are actually meaningful and purposeful for us.
Getting our midline control under, stability and a stable base so that we can better use our extremities. If we're trying to just strengthen and have control from our shoulders and our arms, but we're lacking what's happening in the center, it's going to be really hard to control. And we see this a lot if people are doing exercises and all of a sudden they're getting shoulder pain, back pain, because they have zero control of what's happening from this entire pillar, and they're just trying to strengthen from the legs or from the shoulders with that lack of awareness. I mean, that's everything that we want within the core. Lifting is a huge way to get core work happening, but it comes at the awareness of what you have internally within your body. That's when it can become so powerful, is when you understand how to breathe and lift. When you understand how to hold that rib cage and core. Sometimes I think we jump too quickly to using a belt around us for stability before learning how to really engage through the core to really hold you. I'm not saying a weight belt is bad. I think that it can be extremely useful, especially when you're getting into super heavy weights. However, I think sometimes we rely on that for our stability rather than our internal support. And I think we have to build that internal support, understand how that works, feel that at a heavier weight, and then use a weight belt just to continue to progress.
Especially if you're somebody who's just trying to learn how to lift for function and lift for daily maintenance of your own body and back pain. You shouldn't be thinking about throwing a belt on when you're going to do your general deadlifts or squats in the gym. Like, your goal is to be able to do it during your everyday life, and you're not going to throw a weight belt on when you bend down to pick up groceries. There can be a place for ab exercise to get to that journey, to build that initial awareness of activation before we jump into something more complex and dynamic, like an actual lift. So 3 core exercises.
Ab.
We'll start with abs. 3 ab exercises. Let's go. First, everyone talks about the crunch and, don't do crunches. It's bad for your back. There are ways to effectively do crunches and activate all of those different layers of abs. And I think that one of the primary things that Jen teaches in, that I definitely do now, is trying to focus on bringing that point on your chest bone. I've got a nice pigeon chest, so I got a nice little point here. Try to bring that directly up towards the ceiling as you're doing your crunch, rather than crunching towards your knees, right? Because then you're going to actually be getting that action of just trying to compress from the rib cage down to the pelvis and keep everything else stable.
Yeah, it allows you, and it kind of forces you to have to use that transverse abdominis a little bit more to create that stability from that pelvis to the rib cage, rather than just crunching and using the rectus abdominis. It's not bad to just use the rectus abdominis. There's a time and place for it, of course. However, when we start to overuse just that six-pack muscle, that's when we're going to put a lot of pressure on that fascia that's right in the middle, which is called our linea alba. And when that pressure is only being directed in one place out toward that linea fascia and not out toward the back, the sides, the obliques, the pelvic floor, like without everything working together, we can start to get some separation, and it can become dysfunctional, lead to back pain, lead to different symptoms that we might be having. Another really famous one, especially if you go to physical therapy, is going to be like, or Pilates, is your supine marches. So that supine meaning laying on your back, and then marching meaning you're not necessarily moving from the chest at all, but you're marching one knee up and then the other knee up, or maybe you start at more of a tabletop position with your shins parallel to the ground and knees bent, and then you tap one heel down and the other heel down. So those are examples of kind of controlling that lower abdominal. A lot of people trying to target more of the transverse abdominis. However, if you have hip popping, if you notice that your back starts to take over in pressure, or your hips kind of wobble side to side as you're doing that exercise, you might not be stabilizing as much as you want to in that transverse abdominis. You might be activating a little bit more through the hip flexor, the quad tendon even, and you might feel quad burning if you're doing those exercises, and even your back is maybe activating a little bit more than the transverse. I'm a fan of bending the spine. So the abs help you to bend the spine. That's just reality, right? So I used to be like, oh, never doing sit-ups, never doing crunches, never doing that ab pull down, but I've come to respect it a lot more and appreciate what it does. We're working certain muscles, we're creating range of motion within the spine. That's beautiful. That's great. And the reality is, especially when you become a mom and you got to pop out of bed really quickly, what are you going to do? Roll to your side, sit up nice and no, you're going to sit up. Like you're going to do a sit up. So having function of your abs is a good thing. So we're definitely not against it at all. We're for working your abs. However, we're also for getting control of your entire core. So let's go into those exercises.
This is when we start looking into things like planks. Because a plank is going to have you activating all the way from hips to shoulders throughout the entire core. And then we talk about different side plank variations. You know, that's going to really help us work that side line with our abductors on the outsides of our hips through our QL and the sides of our core, or the side of our abdomen and the obliques.
Your shoulder blades are really firing up on a plank, which is why I love plank variations. You talk about shoulder stability work, do a plank. It's not just about the abs, I should say. And the way that you can feel the abs most is when you're focusing on the breath, which is cool, because then you bring in the diaphragm, squeezing those glutes. So you're getting the pelvis, the pelvic floor.
Similar to planks, but slightly different, is crawling. That would be the number 2 core exercise. And I love crawling. I love different bear crawls because it gets you activating similarly to planks, but you can be really dynamic with it and you can start to move around. And I love doing even just static holds when you're in kind of that quadruped position or on your toes and on your hands, but then you can start to crawl to the side or crawl forward. And then it helps you work on kind of that anti-rotation. But again, that gets you pressing into your opposite hand and opposite foot like we do when we're up walking, right? So it starts to incorporate that reciprocal movement, arm and leg, arm and leg.
And then the last core exercise we kind of already mentioned, which was lifting. And almost any kind of load, external load that you put on your body. It doesn't have to be a heavy barbell even, you know, it could be a weight. So we could talk about goblet squats, like you're squeezing. You shouldn't have your arms out to the side, I should say, for goblet squat. You should be pulling your elbows down. So now I'm contracting and I'm using my shoulder blades. My lats are really activated, my core, because I'm pulling my rib cage down, getting everything in position. And then I'm squatting. I'm using my legs, my hips, like everything is really working. Even if I used a resistance band, you know, like any load that you're putting on your spine is a core exercise.
But again, throughout life, you're going to need to lift things. You're going to need to do a, quote, deadlift when you go to lift a suitcase that's 20 pounds. Or, I mean, one of my favorite types of core type lifts is carries. Any sort of carry. If you're just holding, especially unbalanced, where you have just a weight in one hand, because that way it's going to want to throw your center of mass off to one side. So you need to use your core to correct, or doing overhead carries. Anything that is carry related, I just love. Maybe it's because I grew up in Minnesota around all the farms, so I love the farmer carries. But
it really creates resiliency within the body because we're building the strength around the entire spine. That's only going to help your back, scoliosis or not. I have scoliosis. I lift with barbells. I lift with dumbbells. I lift with kettlebells. I lift with all the things because I want my body to be resilient in all of the ways and really help to build that strength. And we know that when we load our body, we're loading our bone as well, which is helping to prevent osteoporosis and weakening of our system. We're going to age. That's normal in life, but we build the resiliency by loading the body. We need load. If you're still confused on what I mean by different pressures or dispersing pressures, making sure you're getting the pelvic floor, the shoulder blades, that all the things that make up this core really work well. I talk about this in so much detail in the Optimal Body membership. And depending on when you're listening to this, that might still be available, or the Jen app, which this is just jen.health. If you haven't gone to this website in general, just everyone, please go to jen.health, sign up, get into it. It's going to be a beautiful place to just continue to learn about your body and relieve aches and pains. But for right now, at least, we have the Optimal Body membership where there's core specific from core 1 to core 4 in every single month that really takes you through. Here's your foundation and here's how you progressively build upon it. Everyone loves core 1, core 2 especially. Like you don't even have to do core 3 and core 4 throughout the entire program, and you get so much out of it and feel heaps different.
And the awesome thing is, even if you just go and sign up for the Optimal Body membership, you will still get access into the Jen platform. So bonus. So go check those out again, wherever we're at right now, and keep on learning more about that core. Again, I was a PT for a while before I met Jen. And once I met Jen, it completely revamped how I thought of my core and how I worked my core. And I'm still continuing to learn. So I feel like no matter how much you research and study this stuff, even if it's your profession, there's always more to learn.
Thanks so much for joining us on another podcast. We hope that you learned a little bit. You're going to incorporate some of these exercises that we're talking about, all of them, because they're all gravely important. And if you have some favorites, let us know. How do you hit the core specifically in your own workout?